Hey, welcome back, guys. It's off to another semester talking about fundraising. So we're back here at the Nonprofit Leadership Studio. Our guest tonight, Ann Murphy. She's a principal over at Dini Partners, one of the top development consulting firms in the country. And we have her here with us today to sort of give us all the ins and outs and the basics of fundraising. Ann, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you.
So you've had a very rich history doing fundraising, and in a little bit I want to get to some of your background, but you work with nonprofit organizations all across the spectrum. And when you see an organization that's doing well, oftentimes there's a good development person, a good fundraising person in charge. What makes a good development professional? And what do you like to see in those people? And when you see that, you think, things are going to work out here.
Okay, absolutely. And I've seen the best of the best and the worst of the worst. So let's talk about the best, because that's what we want people to do. You know, I think one of the first things I would say is they have to be a very ethical person. I think there's a lot of gray sometimes in fundraising. And so being ethical in the fact that you have to be donor-centered and really meeting the intent of what donors are giving their dollars for. And it's very easy to want to think, oh, well, it's okay to use those dollars in a little different way because it's really for the mission of what we're doing. But I think being ethical in that, being a good listener. The best fundraisers really listen for the gift. So they listen to those donors, they listen to the institution, and they really absorb that. I think you need to be passionate. You can't just work for an organization because it's a good job title, but some level of passion for what that work that you're really doing and wanting to make that happen. I think a good fundraiser also has good board presence, that you can present well, that people take you seriously, and that you are really professional. And so I think when I absolutely think about that. And I think last is being able to really work with volunteers. I think sometimes our development work is getting a little too staff-centered, and knowing how to involve and inspire volunteers to partner with us to make that happen. And then really knowing, even if 70% of what happened was because of your hard work and 30% was that volunteer, you give that volunteer 100% of the credit.
So many people think that a good development officer is like a salesperson, and it's all about asking for money. And you hear people say, I don't like asking for money. Explain why that's not the case.
Right. I think more of it is listening for the gift, knowing the right time to ask. But if you think about the whole process of involving a donor, it's not identifying them and then asking for a gift or asking for that order or asking for that sale, like you say in for-profit sales. But it's really engaging them in the life of the institution in the manner they want to be engaged, whether that's sending them quarterly reports, taking them on tours, getting them to volunteer to come read to children one afternoon if that's where they're interested, being on the board, serving on a committee. And so I think the key is really thinking about that whole level of that cultivation of that engagement with the donor. And then that gift will happen. I think we still do need to ask, and I think we need to inspire and challenge people and show them the way that their gifts can transform something that's important to them. No one ever gives because an institution needs the money. People don't give to needs. People give to solutions and benefits and solutions to things that are important to them. And so it's, again, learning to listen to what's important to them and then showing them how together you can accomplish something they want to accomplish.
So you're selling the dream, you're selling the passion, you're not selling that your organization needs the money to be successful, right? It's all about selling that dream. One of my good buddies who has passed on was Father T.J. Martinez, who started Cristo Rey. I often think he was like one of the best fundraisers you'll ever meet. And I don't know that he ever asked for money. He was so enthusiastic and so passionate that he almost had people saying, TJ, what can I do for you? Is that what it's all about, is like becoming a buddy in a sense, or becoming someone who people just want to help?
Right, but not everyone can be TJ.
Yeah, actually, I'm not sure anyone can be TJ, right?
And so I think within the development world and within the CEO, executive director, you've got to find where you're comfortable. None of us can do it like somebody else did it. So we need to know, I think you need to know within your own strengths, how do you engage people, how can you do that? But I think absolutely that passion that he had for what they were really
Yeah.
trying to accomplish with the show. But I will tell you, behind the scenes, B. Snido was his director of development, still is the director of development over there. She made sure all those moving pieces behind the scene made it that TJ was in the right place with the right people doing the right things. And so I think there's a partnership, a stronger partnership with the CEO and the chief development officer at a nonprofit, stronger than what perhaps your finance or property or HR, because they have to very much team up so much of what they do. I think they have to look at the two strengths of those two positions are very strong. One of the probably better teams I've ever seen in the past in this was at the Museum of Fine Arts with Peter Marzio and I've just drawn a blank on her name. I'm sorry, they're both deceased.
She was very good.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. The two of them made the Margaret Skidmore.
Yes.
So Peter Marzio and Margaret Skidmore were a perfect team. Now, could they have been as great other places? I don't know. They just knew how to work together. Greg Robertson over at HDO and the artistic director at HDO, again, a great team. So I think when you get that good team, you're unstoppable.
I want to get to some of the basics of development, but first, you mentioned ethics as being very important. And every once in a while, I'll hear people say, well, can't we just pay a percentage of what we raise to our development people? Talk about how that's not necessarily a good idea.
Okay. And you know, and it is people, and they think that about consultants a lot. Can't we just give you a percentage? And in for-profit, that is absolutely the way it's done. The Association of Fundraising Professionals Code of Ethics absolutely won't allow that to happen. But the reason behind that, development is a team sport. It's no one person that makes those gifts possible. And so by saying that someone gets a percent, in my opinion, that someone gets a percentage, then it's the sense of, okay, I may have written the world's greatest proposal to the Brown Foundation. But isn't it amazing? Our chairman of the board lives next door to Herman Studi, and this person knows Chris Seraphin real well. So was it their relationship or my beautiful proposal that I wrote? So I think there's a little bit of that, again, that it's not a team sport. I also think that it lessens the value of people's gifts. I mean, again, it's not back to meeting the needs of the institution. It's about the work that we're doing. And so I think that percentage kind of takes that away from that.
Yeah. Whenever I hear that, I say there's nothing that's going to keep someone from giving a development person a raise if they raise a lot of money, but we just don't do the percentage thing.
Right. But now, it is very ethical to do bonuses. And those bonuses can be based, it can't be on a percentage of what you raise, but there's a lot of metrics that you can absolutely do to give development officers bonuses. And in fact, it's becoming much more commonplace to do that. And so that is common, and there's great guidelines on the AFP website that can tell you how to and not do bonuses. But I think bonuses to me are a good way to reward development people.
So let's assume, Ann, that you and I take over a medium to large size organization, and we're putting together a development plan for them. We start with the board. How important should the board be in terms of us getting development going?
I think the newer an organization is, probably the even more important that board, because again, as you're growing your donor base, you need the fact that your board will open doors, will introduce, will expand from their network to introduce it to you to create a new network for that organization. So startup and newer organizations, I think that day-to-day reliance on board to help do that. Now, the bigger institutions like the Rices and Methodist hospitals and whatever, I think it's still very important, those relationships they have with some of the big funders. They're not necessarily always introducing, but again, just those natural relationships they have, I think, are very important. And I also think it's important, not every board member should be out asking for money. Absolutely should not. A lot of people just aren't good at it. And you certainly don't want someone who's terrified and struggling to ask for a gift. But I think it's every board member's responsibility to be an incredible ambassador in the community, which means telling the story of the institution through a philanthropic lens that gets people excited about what they can do. It's being willing to thank donors. It's being willing to open the doors, go to cultivation events, write thank you notes, all of those pieces. Because again, when we think about the donor cycle, the ask is the smallest piece, but we want board members involved in everything.
We sometimes hear CEOs say, we're just not raising a lot of money because my board doesn't really raise money. And I think if I just left my board or any top board, you just let them go, they don't raise money without direction, really. I mean, the staff has to be involved with the board to make this happen.
Absolutely. I think that the CEO and the Chief Development Officer have to be at all times what I call philanthropic educators. And part of that philanthropic education is absolutely that board. I think every time, I always guide people that every time you're going to be with a board member, think about some nugget that you can educate them on when it comes to philanthropy. Maybe it's a new way to tell the story. Maybe it's talking about a particular prospect that you can engage them of how you would uncover a prospect's philanthropic values. And so I think we've got to be those educators. But again, we certainly don't want the board figuring out how do I write a thank you letter or how do I do a proposal. So you need to absolutely staff them. And it's again listening to in what area of development a board member would be interested in being in. Is this someone who says, I'll host a lunch and invite 15 people, and then you help them put that together, then you staff that, and you know what staff people you would want. This is someone who's willing to write a lot of thank you letters when it happened. This is someone who's willing to invite their friends at your gala or your luncheon, and you really talk to them about what kinds of people they might invite. Or this is somebody who says, I'm willing to go on and ask. I'm willing to serve the piece that I'll tell the story, but when it comes to saying, will you give $10,000? I really need you as the staff person to do that. And so it's really understanding where their comfort level is and utilizing that rather than trying to force them to be a part of it that they're never going to be comfortable in doing.
Mm-hmm. Now, some people talk about 3-legged stools or 4-legged chairs with development, but it seems like we could probably do a 6-legged or 8-legged. But let me go over a couple of components. Individual giving. So people who just give money to an organization, how important, just like I give at church or I give to my university, how important is individual giving for a nonprofit?
Well, when you think overall the giving in this country, which is over $350 billion is given in this country every year, and I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but it's given. When you look at that, about 80% of that is individuals, about 15% of that is foundations. No, I'm sorry, 70, somewhere in this, I'm sorry I didn't do this. I know these numbers. About 72% is individuals, about 15% is foundations, about 8% is bequests, and about 5% is corporations. I think those are, which says to me, if you think about it, 8% bequests, 5% corporations. Dead people give more money than companies. And if you can always remember, dead people give more money than companies. But when you think about those bequests and those foundations, about a half of the money coming from foundations are coming from family foundations being controlled by the individuals who gave that money or next generation. So you've got somewhere in the low 80s, 82, 84% of every penny given in this country is given by an individual. That should tell you individuals are very important. So if you have a development program that's heavy on corporations and heavy on foundations and very small on individuals, you're really missing a lot of the dollars that are giving. I also will tell you that if you're heavy on corporations, particularly if you're in the greater city of Houston right now, you're probably going to be wishing you had a few more individuals that weren't Chevron and Exxon. And
are individuals less likely to be dependent upon how the stock market or how the economy is doing? If you have a lot of individual givers, are they likely to sort of be steady?
We did see a small drop in giving in 2009 and 2010, and now it's come back very strong. Not everyone will be impacted by the same economic downturns. Not everybody in the city is involved in energy. In fact, today's paper talked about there are a couple chemical companies who are making a lot of money right now. So on that sense, it's also being aware of when the economy impacts. But as much as the economy dropped in that recession we all lived through, giving didn't drop by that great a percentage. What we found was that people gave to fewer organizations. They gave to that core group that they really valued. So they may have, during the boom time, given to 7 or 8 or 9. During a downturn, they give to maybe 3 or 4. Or they give half as much to all of those organizations. So it's really being strong. The other piece is that events do suffer during downturns.
Yeah.
So the more, I call them mission donors, the more you can grow individual donors who are supporting you because they believe in your mission, and you've brought them along, that they talk about, that they believe in that, the less you're going to be impacted when the economy is turning down.
A lot of individual giving happens through events. Talk about sort of event giving, because in Houston it seems like there's a lot of event giving. We do a lot of events at Children at Risk, but they're time consuming and they're not for everyone. Even though you see lots of them, it doesn't mean it's for everyone.
Right. You know, I personally think that event fundraising is the least impactful, has the the least rate of return on investment. I also don't think you're...
And the most fun.
Sometimes. I will tell you, a lot of people are not crazy about chicken and pea dinners at the Hyatt. Anyway, with a lot of long speeches and okay food and okay wine. But why I think a lot of people depend on special events is I think they find volunteers that's what they want to do. They're more comfortable selling a $10,000 table than asking someone. So I do understand that sometimes you can get a group of volunteers involved. But the problem is most of those donors, if you look at most organizations over a 10-year period, the ups and downs of event donors are not consistent. So they're not growing a donor base that they can always count on. 3/4 of the people in any room during an event have no idea what the mission of that organization is, so you're not repeating those gifts. If you really looked at the cost of putting on events versus the truly net dollars, it's a very costly thing because most organizations do not put staff time in. So they look at direct, and so if you were to put staff time in, so I always feel like most organizations should have one really, if you're an organization who has a budget of probably less than $5 million, you should probably only have one really premier event a year that you spend that time doing that. Because I will find that a lot of times when you have 2, 3, and 4, you're just swapping dollars. That you probably could have grown that one event that then people are swapping. Years ago in the 80s, I went to work at the March of Dimes. And when we got there, they put on events that they literally would put on events that raised $1,000 car washes up to our Walk America, which was raising $1 million. We looked at that bottom group of baby events that we were doing and truly looked at the cost that it was doing and eliminated all of them. Had a staff person that we then put on Walk America, and we took Walk America from $1 million to $1.5 million in 1 year and got rid of events that brought in less than $50,000.
So it worked well for you. Why do you think that in Houston events are so popular as opposed to other places?
Events are popular everywhere. I've never worked in a city that events aren't popular. So I think they just...
They're just different everywhere.
They are different everywhere. So, and unfortunately, I think people see events like the Houston Grand Opera, which does incredible fundraiser, the MFA, and some of those larger organizations that do these incredible galas that are raising millions of dollars. The Barbara Bush Literary Event that raises $2 or $3 million every year, and they think they can do that. I don't think they realize that takes years to grow into that level event. It also means, do you have that kind of board leadership that can sit down and ask a Lynn Wyatt to chair your event and give $1 million? I mean, it's that sense of having that kind of network out there. Now, if you're an organization that has that kind of network, great.
Now, one of the things that people like about events is that it brings in so many unrestricted dollars. Talk a little bit about the difference between unrestricted and restricted dollars, and why individual giving could be just as good for those unrestricted dollars.
Well, you know, everyone always says unrestricted dollars are king. I think a lot of organizations, people don't want to necessarily give to unrestricted. They don't understand that term. When people solicit someone for an unrestricted gift or a gift to our annual fund, it's like buying light bulbs and toilet paper, and who gets excited? How does that really accomplish the mission? How is that transforming the organization? So I think organizations are better off really talking in broad sense of what their programs are accomplishing and getting people to support a program that may cost you $200,000 a year to put on that program. And I'm not talking about direct costs, but all the indirect costs that it really takes to do that program. And talk to people about that sometimes. I think people can get more excited and grow their gift. if they've been a $1,000 donor to unrestricted annual, if you can get them really excited about transforming a program, I think it's easier to grow those gifts. Though we do need those unrestricted dollars to allow the freedom of an organization to really operate. But I think when we talk about annual dollars, we need to talk about 3 or 4 some of our programs that we're doing in broad terms that people can get excited about making that happen and not just unrestricted.
Talk about foundation giving. Houston seems to have a lot of foundations. Dallas has a lot of foundations. Maybe if you're in mid-sized cities, you don't see as much of that. But how can foundations help a nonprofit?
Well, we do have a lot of foundations in Texas in general. When you go to the foundation directory, I don't know what the people in Nebraska and Wyoming are doing because they've got like 5 pages in the foundation directory. I think the key to foundation giving is I think our foundations are a little different than the East Coast in that when you look at most of our large foundations and even our small foundations, they are probably not more than one, maybe a couple of them are starting to get to the second generation of the people that funded those. Many, it's still the people that funded it are sitting around the table making those decisions. So I look at those foundations as building the relationships with those trustees, that it almost is in a sense of thinking about the family foundations and saying, those are like individuals. So how do we grow those relationships with those individuals? To me, the grant proposal is the necessary thing the IRS requires foundations to have. It is not going to be the thing that gets you the gift. So it's really building those relationships with those individual trustees. Now, we're beginning to have some foundations like the Houston Endowment and the Episcopal Health Charities Foundation. Those are more like national corporate, the big national institutional foundations, which is much different than building those family foundations. And so foundation giving, even though nationally it's about 15% of all giving, it's a much higher percentage here in Houston. I also think when we look right now at the down in the economy, people are like, what's happening? Well, foundations are not down. I mean, I looked at this market again. It's above 16,000 still, and oil went up today, thank goodness. But when you think about the last 3 years, and foundations give on a 3-year running average, they've all seen tremendous increases in their portfolios. So right now is a very good time to be talking to foundations.
And in terms of working with foundations so they start giving you money, it's similar to individual giving, right? You're getting to know either the family members, the trustees, even the grant officers.
Right.
The relationship is still sort of the king here.
Absolutely, absolutely the king to that.
Yeah.
And you're right, when you think about the grant officers or the executive directors of these foundations, you need to look at the fact that almost to a fault, every one of those I've ever dealt with are there to help you. It's not at them and us. They really want to work with you. And so absolutely, when I think of Katie Hayes over at the Brown Foundation, she will talk with you. Now, she may not always meet with you and she's busy, but she's going to give you guidance. And the thing is, you need to listen. You need not to think, oh, well, we're one off, we can do things a little differently. When a grant officer tells you this is the way it is, that's the way it is.
So one other area which you said was the lowest is corporate giving. Talk a little bit about corporate giving, because people, I think, automatically assume, oh, ExxonMobil has a lot of money, they're going to give us money, Shell is going to give us money. Why isn't that the best way to think?
Well, because when you think about corporations, they have to answer to shareholders. And so shareholders do not buy stock in companies so they can give that money away to something they may not even believe in.
Right.
And so that's one thing. They are for profit. But when you go to a corporation, because when you think about it, they have to answer to their shareholders. So how do they answer to their shareholders that say this was a good investment that we made? Corporations give in the communities that their employees live in because they want to have healthy, strong communities. They give where their customers are really in those communities. So it's where their employees and customers a lot of times. And so that's the reason you see so many corporations give highly to arts and education, because again, that strengthens the overall. So I think going to a corporation, more so than absolutely probably any other constituency, you have to show how it's good for that company to really want to give, and really understanding what they're trying to accomplish. And in the close to 40 years I've been in this business, corporate fundraising has become much more sophisticated than it ever was in the 70s. They really have mission statements now. They know exactly what they want to do with their dollars and where they want to invest those dollars. And if you don't fit in those priorities, it is very hard to get in the door and be able to see that. You know, in the good old days when the CEO really kind of made those decisions, and again, the good old days, so the CEOs were men, and their wives were doing galas, they supported those galas. I think those days are absolutely over. And so the research is out there, know what their priorities are, know what kinds of things they're supporting, and if you don't fit, don't waste their time and don't waste your time in really doing that.
Talk a little bit about government gifts, because a lot of organizations have grown very large just through government grants.
Right. I will tell you, my career, I've spent the least amount of time in government grants.
Yeah.
Government grants are absolutely a formula to that. And so again, if you are going to move into a lot of government grants, make sure you have someone on your staff or you hire someone that truly understands the state and the federal, which again I think are different. I think the states are finding fewer and fewer guests, but even the federal government I think is fewer and fewer guests. But it's having someone really know how you write. Now here's that grant proposal. Now here's the difference on the foundation. Many times exactly how you write that grant proposal to the federal and the state are important. Sometimes there are certain ones, there are key words you need to use. There are key phrases you need to use. So that is a science. There is no art to that. And so when I think of fundraising, I think it's the art piece. But when you think of government grants, it's the science piece. Even when I used to work here at UH downtown and we would work on government grants, it would knowing who the readers are going to be on those federal grants. And it's getting someone from UH downtown that had been a reader on, and so they know what they're looking for in that. And so there's very much a science to that. And I think government grants are just going to get smaller and smaller. I don't think we're going to, in my lifetime, going to see government grants back to where they were in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah. So if we're back to starting that organization or taking over that organization, a good board and a focus on individual giving and having good relationships with foundations. Those are some of the key
And
points.
I think having a well-run organization that is transparency in their financial numbers and can back up when they're out saying this is what we're doing, that's what they're doing. Because I think if you have a reputation that's ever tainted in the media, I think it's very hard to overcome that.
Who are some of the good fundraisers in town? Some of the good fundraising organizations?
You know, I have to say the Houston Grand Opera, Greg Robertson, who's the Chief Development Officer over there, is a great fundraiser. He is very fortunate in that he loved opera before he even went to the Houston Grand Opera, so he was already passionate. He is absolutely one of the most ethical people I know, but he's a great listener. He listens for that gift. He has conversations with people about what they're really trying to accomplish with their philanthropy and how they can do that through HGO. And so he gets people excited about what can be accomplished with their gift. He's not going in with a needs list. It's like, what can we accomplish with this together? I mean, you know, they finished their campaign last year, above goal, and they did that campaign during some, 08, 9, 10. I mean, they did that campaign during some pretty hard times. So I think they've done a great job. I think actually the Houston Food Bank, I've not worked with them directly, but when you think about that campaign they did to build that building, they had the right leadership. They got together some leadership that absolutely said this will be successful. And when you look at some of the gifts they really got for that food bank, I think it was really incredible in that broad base. I have to say the Girl Scouts, I'm a little biased. I'm on the Fund Development Committee over there and love the Girl Scouts. I think they're really, as an organization, particularly here in Houston, so many people think we're giving cookies, we don't need to give dollars. And so I think, again,
that's interesting, yeah.
They're very much working. I've seen over the last 5 to 7 years a transformation of their board and bringing on the right leadership, and also very much moving towards growing those individual gifts. And learning to tell the story through a philanthropic lens, learning to tell the story of what they're doing to transform girls' lives.
So let me go to the Twitterverse.
Okay.
Because lots of people have tweeted in questions. So I'll start with Frida Clark, who wants to know, when you're doing a campaign, what makes a fundraising campaign stand out when there are different groups going for the same dollars?
Different, I guess, nonprofits is what you mean.
Yeah.
I think there are 5 pillars that for successful campaigning. I think even successful development. One is that culture of philanthropy, really understanding the role philanthropy plays in your organization, embracing philanthropy, really recognizing people wanting to partner with donors. The other is having that case for support, having a case, being able to tell your story through that philanthropic lens of how is philanthropy going to transform the mission of your organization. Not the organization, what you're trying to accomplish with your mission, and being able to really tell that story well. And then I think the next thing is really having, like the Houston Food Bank, somebody, that core group of leadership that says, we will be successful. I've worked on a couple campaigns that I did not think would be as successful as they were, and it was absolutely with that leadership who said, this is going to absolutely happen. And then again, having that infrastructure behind them, having that staff that could staff it, the right database, being able to do the right things behind really making that happen. And then it's having prospects who believe in what you're doing. And it's, again, when we think about cultivating a farm and apples, and you cultivate them till they get to the perfect before you pick them. So it's also knowing that with those prospects is you don't want to pick them too early, and you don't want to wait and let them rot on the tree. And so it's growing those relationships and knowing when the right time is to really ask them.
Liz Earhart wants to know, what are your favorite ways to acknowledge donors and volunteers?
My favorite way is to really understand what would be important to them. Do not do is most donors don't want tchotchkes. They don't want their gifts going for tchotchkes.
Plaques and little things.
Yeah. But I think my favorite way is to bring it as close to your mission as possible. Actually, one of my favorite things that ever happened, I was at UH downtown, and Gordon Kane, one of my favorite philanthropists, gave $4 million for a Master's of Teaching program here. So about 15 or 20 of the first students that were in that program, we did a thank you video for him. And for those who didn't know, Gordon Kane had lost his eyesight later in life, and so he really couldn't see very well. He could see a video, but he couldn't read anything. So sending him a thank you letter wasn't going to do it. Yeah. So we had a group of students that did a video for him, and we sent it to him of thanking him of the difference that's going to really make in doing that. Versus just doing a thank you lunch, we wanted to do a video that he could watch again, and that could make a difference to him of really being able to watch that video. I think the more you can get whatever your mission is, the more you can tie your mission into that, the more I think there's an expectation, absolutely, that the organization sends a thank you letter, but then really getting some meaningful thank you notes from board members. When I was at the March of Dimes, we had a board member that through their relationship got the largest gift we'd ever gotten, over $200,000. And so we had every board member, this is how long ago, we faxed to them. We faxed to every board member the fact that this volunteer had made a difference in getting this gift, and asked them to drop Jeff a note. He came to the next board meeting with this handful of handwritten notes he'd gotten from board members saying he'd never been so touched to be thanked, so meaningful. He was with that organization for years after that. So again, I think more personally, meaningful, and tied to your mission.
Oh, wow. Very nice. Spencer Lightsey wants to know, what lessons can be learned from a national campaign, an example being the Statue of Liberty, the pennies, and that can be used in local fundraising? Are there examples that we could take from national campaigns? And let me think, and I worked on the Statue of Liberty campaign, so that's, I still think philanthropy is local. Even national campaigns, it has to be local. People do give more to their backyard. So I think one of the things, again, is tying it back to what's important in that person's life, a lot of times in their backyard, of looking at that piece. I think it's also, for the first couple years after Obama was elected, so many organizations would come to us and say, we want to do like Obama did. And I said, well, get me an Obama and we'll do it. So again, I think it's realizing that media is important, your website is important. I think national organizations spend the money on their websites, and so smaller organizations have to realize that they are being judged against national organizations when it comes to those kinds of things. So make sure your website really tells your story well, and I think that philanthropic piece of really doing that.
Is there a lot of times big national campaigns have big national spokesperson. So do you have somebody that can do those testimonials for you locally that people then want to give? J.J. Watts would be one that would come
Everyone
to
loves him. Corey McCain wants to know, how do you approach a difficult donor?
I would say, why are they difficult? But
Right.
I guess I've never.
You've never had a difficult
yeah,
donor?
I have. Yes, I've had a couple difficult donors. I think it's again back to that listening. It's perhaps again, are you truly listening to what they're trying to accomplish? I think donors are difficult because you're not listening. Now, I think there are also sometimes donors that expect or are asking for things that ethically you can't do, and I think it's okay to say no to a gift.
Yeah.
And so I think, but again, I think it's back to really listening to that donor. I would
It's sort of figuring out what they want,
right?
And as long as it's not crossing the line, and maybe they're not your type of person, but they
Right.
just want you to listen to them, even though they're difficult.
Right.
And we've had people like that.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've worked with a lot of donors that have done great things for organization.
Right.
I wouldn't necessarily want to go have dinner with them,
Right.
but that's okay. But I will tell you, back to my not liking special events, I will tell you most of the difficult donors I deal with are special event donors.
Interesting.
They want a better table, they want this, they want that.
I like special events more than you do.
I know.
That. Yeah. So Whitney Manuel wants to know, and this is very similar to before, what's the difference in fundraising in a local setting rather than a national setting? Is it easier to raise for a national group or for a local group?
I don't think one's easier than the other. I think, again, people give to things that impact them. So if it's a national organization, I think you have to really show how it's impacting. If you're in New York City, like the March of Dimes is based in New York, but they can really show how it's making a difference right here in the city of Houston. Girl Scouts is in New York, but we're making a difference of what we're doing here in Houston. Now, I will tell you that philanthropy is local, but it's also very interesting when you look at this millennium generation. Community to them is the world. And so, when I think of community, I think of Greater Houston, maybe Texas. Well, if you've lived on the internet, it's the world.
Right.
And so, again, what's local to them has a little bit of a different flavor. And so the other is to really understand the generation of your donors, because if you have a lot of donors that are over the age of 50 or under the age of 30, the way they look at things can be different. And so I think you need to be very cognizant of that.
Jonathan wants to know, if you don't have an endowment as an organization, how do you suggest building one?
First of all, you need to have a real case for why you need one. And that case.
Everyone thinks they need one because it's more money, right?
Well, I think I've heard organizations say, we want a big enough endowment that we don't ever have to raise money again. I'm like, well, good luck with that. Because one, having to raise money every year is good for an organization, because we're having to go out every single year and justify our existence. And as nonprofits, we should have to go out every year and justify our existence. And so I don't think you could ever raise an endowment that you wouldn't have to do that. But I think having an endowment, you first have to really understand, why do we need this endowment? What is it going to do long term for the life of our organization? And I'll tell you, if you really want to raise an endowment, you've got to have a very strong base of long-term donors. Typically, donors to endowments have been your very steady, long-term annual donors that have supported your mission, not events. Event donors don't typically turn into endowment donors. So it's, again, back to having those people, whether it's $10 every year or $100 or $10,000, they've really supported you in that way.
Carla Adams wants to know, what's the cost difference of having an expensive fundraiser while asking for donations? Does it balance out?
Fundraiser, I assume she means events.
Event, yeah.
No, having a big
Yeah,
expensive
you said that,
event it's your return on your dollars is going to be very small. And I think any nonprofit that does an event that doesn't net $50,000 should, if it doesn't start minimum netting at least $50,000 within the first year or two, maybe 2 or 3 years, you need to quit the rate, because you are not making money. Right. I don't care what you're saying to yourself, you're not making money. And probably it really should be making over $100,000 pretty quickly, or you're not counting staff
Not worth
time.
it. Julie Voss wants to know about the importance of stewardship in fundraising.
absolutely probably the most crucial thing.
Yeah, talk a little bit about what that is for people.
You know, when we think about stewardship, it's how you engage a donor in the life of the organization after the gift in a meaningful way to that donor. At first, bottom line is showing gratitude to that donor. The thank you letter with the IRS rules is not stewardship. That's following the IRS rules, so that doesn't count. It's what you do after that. The worst thing we can ever do is treat our donors like ATM machines. The only time we go to them is when we want cash. So it's informing them and being transparent of how their gift was being spent. It's really getting them excited about what you can really happen in your giving. So that might be quarterly newsletters. It might be an annual report, which nowadays many people do online. But it's partly informing them. I think the next piece is, for those that have interest in it, how do you involve them in the life of your organization? Whether that be inviting them to an open house, inviting them to a program that you're doing. I think with some of your larger donors, engaging them with some of the top leadership at your organization. Perhaps that I worked with an organization that used to have, their CEO's name was Terry, and they used to have Tuesdays with Terry. And so they would invite people to a breakfast, and they would say, we have Tuesdays with Terry, we're inviting a handful of our recent partners and donors. We'd love for you to come have breakfast. And it really worked because, one, I think if you invite people one-on-one, the expectation is they're going to ask me for a gift and I'm going to owe them because I had. But if there's safety in small numbers, and so they were able to really invite some people and doing that. So again,
well, Breakfast with Bob has more of a ring than Breakfast with Terry, even. So it's a good idea.
So this is Tuesdays with Terry. So that's
Tuesdays.
Tuesdays with Terry. Yeah, Breakfast with Bob would be good. Yeah. So again, I think it's how you meaningfully thank them, how you continue to inform them, and how you involve them in the life of the organization that's right for that. To me, stewardship is how you can absolutely grow a gift and get someone to give a second time. Because interestingly enough, about 50% of the people that give a first-time gift to organizations don't give again.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
The net numbers keep getting higher and higher.
So Rocio Beisa wants to know, how do you determine a perfect team within your organization, results or relationships? The perfect fundraising team, is it all about results or relationships? I know how I would answer that, but
well, it's got to be results.
Yeah.
Because relationships.
It's really both, but you're not going to have results without the relationship.
Right. It's kind of like that apples on the thing. You can cultivate it and water it and nurture it, and it just sits there and rots. So that doesn't do you any good. So again, I think it is results, but it's results that aren't just for the year that group is there, but it's the results that you're able to grow and build on from year to year.
And you can tell pretty early on. I mean, you tell pretty early on when someone who's good at developing relationships is going to be good at getting results, right? I mean, you can.
Right. It's almost a sense that I think a lot of times when we look at someone's resume and they've been somewhere, to be able to call that organization and say, how was the development the year after they left? Did it fall off the cliff? Was it horrible? Or did it continue to grow and prosper because they were really not only raising the dollars for that year, but literally laying that foundation to grow it for the next years?
Jordan Klein wants to know, what's the best way to make a comeback after an ask that went badly?
Well, obviously it depends on how it went badly. I don't think a no is a bad.
Of course.
I think a prospect's a prospect until the will's been probated, so I just don't give up on anybody. I think you need to turn an ask that isn't a gift into a cultivation. So how do you look at the opportunity to continue to educate them, and how do you look at that opportunity of how we grow that person closer to us in the future, and really. And I think you need to, if you're sitting down and actually asking someone for a gift and you get it all a sense in that ask that this isn't the appropriate time, don't ask for the gift. Turn that into, we're exploring some ideas of things. Here's an idea that we had, really wanted to share that with you, wanted to get more of your feedback. So be comfortable pulling back on doing that and being able to say to someone, this has been a great conversation. I'd really love to come back and talk to you about a financial commitment for it at another time. So don't just act like there isn't going to be an ask down the road, but talk about the fact, let's get this, and then I'd love to come back and talk to you again about that.
Lauren Schoonover wants to know, What are some of the biggest mistakes you've seen organizations make when it comes to fundraising?
You won't like this answer, but I think it's when they're too dependent on special events, and they do special event after special.
Yeah.
Because you can't. I do think there's a place for special events. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I chaired the Girl Scout luncheon, so. But I do think the fact it's not looking at the fact of how are we growing a solid base of mission-based donors. Mm-hmm. That group of people that believes in what we're trying to accomplish. Because if you can grow that, then they will repeat their gifts with the right cultivation and stewardship. And so it's also looking at, let's do all special events, and let's just look at corporate giving. The fact that over 80% of all gifts come from individuals, and they can't be all, not everybody wants to buy a $1,000 ticket to an event. Mm-hmm. The other is, I think, in fairness to events, is to say, can you do an event that's unique to your organization that helps sell the mission without a speech that no one listens to?
Right.
But again, makes it somewhat unique in what you're doing and doing that. And it doesn't always have to be the gala. It doesn't always have to be on Friday and Saturday night. And so how do you do some kind of event that's a little unique and different? But again, I think it's diversifying your pool of prospects and donors. I don't think any one fundraising donor or event or anything should probably ever be more than 10 or 15% of your base, because otherwise that goes away and you're in real trouble.
Yeah, exactly. So Denise Steele wants to know, she said she's heard that year-end giving is a good time to ask for donations. How true is it, and is it worth building a program around year-end giving?
You know, I do think there is some year-end giving, because I think people do get bonuses. Not everybody gets bonuses. You need to be aware of those businesses that don't get bonuses until the first quarter of that. But I do think there's two things that I think, as we're out spending a lot of money on ourselves and our children and our family and friends, there is a little bit of a guilt factor that comes in of wanting to help others. So again, I think it's what your organization does. Do you have a story that makes sense of why a year-end gift would make sense during this time of holiday season? But again, you're going to be competing with a lot of organizations that are giving at that time.
Seems like you get a lot of email at the end of the year from lots of organizations asking, huh?
Right. But again, I do think there's some people that do sit down and look at their finances for the year. So again,
our December individual gifts are far larger than any other month. I mean, there's a lot of giving at the end of the
And
year.
I do think social service and youth and serving children and probably, so you need to go back and look at your donors and do an analysis of what months your donors are already giving to you, and see if there is a spike in November and December. And if that is the time your donors are already giving to you, I would absolutely, because like donors give to like organizations, so you can grow it. If you don't see any difference in the months they're giving, maybe a year-end giving isn't what your organization needs to do. Is there something in the life of your organization that would make more sense? If you're a program like Undies for Everyone, they give a lot of underwear to children at the school year. And so really doing kind of a summer push so we can give out underwear to students when they can go back to school makes sense perhaps more than a year in, because their big push is August and September. So I think it's just looking at what your organization does.
If you're a brand new professional, as some of the people in the class will be, and you're going out to work in the development world, what are the things you have to be aware of, and what will your average salary be as a brand new professional in development?
Well, one, and it's kind of like singing to the choir here, but I think the greatest thing they're doing is getting educated, because I think that will help you in your career, not only with your current job, but your future job. So I think being aware of that. Being aware of, when you take a job, really what kind of fundraising that organization does, and are you going to really get the experiences you want in that? Knowing if this is a startup, and this is horrible to say, but an organization that you may only stay at a year or two, because you need to get your foot in the door and you're going to get this experience that you can really grow. I think it's being aware of that 1 or 2 jobs at that year, 2 years is okay. But you start to have 4 or 5 jobs that are 2 years, 2 years, 2 years, I think it does hurt your career. So choose wisely on that 2nd or 3rd job that you can really stay somewhere. Also look at the fact that Do you want to specialize or do you want to be a generalist? If you want to someday be a chief development officer, go someplace that you can get different experiences. Or you know the fact that what you really want to do is write grants and that you're great at that and you want to, then go someplace that you can grow in that. Or you really like to do special events, then go somewhere that you get great experience of doing special events and you can grow where you're doing special events at very large organizations. So it's knowing a little bit of what you want to do with your career path. Not only being passionate about the organization you're going to work for, but what kind of experiences are you going to get? And when we think about salaries, I mean, that is so all over the map from, you know, I think there's some starting salaries at smaller not-for-profits in development that are $30,000 and $40,000. There's some other starting salaries that are a little higher than that. I will tell you there are a handful of some chief development officers in the city, most of them all in health and the big hospitals that make anywhere from $700,000 to $900,000 a year. Now, I'm not sure we can justify those salaries in what we do, but that's where they are. We certainly don't make that in consulting.
You make way more than that, Ann.
Yeah,
Come on,
yeah, right.
Come on.
But again, I think starting out, if you're in a small to mid-sized not-for-profit organization, a director of development, those salaries are sometimes anywhere from $60,000 to $100,000, depending on how much money you're really raising. Special events people probably make the least on that. Planned giving and major gift people on the spectrum can make a lot of dollars, but then again, that's a very specialized talent, and you can really bring in those dollars. I always say to be careful what you wish for and really think about, people always want to be the chief development officer or the VP for development. Well, you need to, do you like to manage people? Do you like to sit on the leadership team at an organization? Do you like politics within an organization? Do you like to hire and fire people and mentor people? Because that's all part of being that chief development officer. Or are you somebody who just loves to raise money? Well, then go be a great major gift officer and let somebody else really deal with all of that other. And nowadays, fortunately, some of the best major gift people are really making a very nice six-figure salary. So you don't have to be the chief development officer to get the largest.
If you were to pick a type of organization, like if you could just go out and be a director of development at a small organization and money was no object, you know, so just based upon your passion, what type of organization would you go to right now?
It would always be youth serving. I've always been passionate about children and youth serving. You know, it's the reason I'm on the Fund Development Committee of the Girl Scouts, and children will always be, and then education. So I'm real torn because I've done a lot of education fundraising in that sense.
Yeah, it used to be right here at UHD. Is
right.
Your favorite restaurant in Houston, Ann?
My favorite Mexican restaurant is El Tiempo. My favorite fried chicken restaurant's Holly's on Sunday night.
Oh, wow. And that's only when they only have chicken on Sunday nights.
Yes, and you have to get that reservation pretty early. I'm doing that. I love Tony Mandola's for seafood. I love Caracol for great grilled oysters. So I'm kind of a foodie, so I can't say my favorite restaurant. You have to give me a parameters on.
Caracol is almost getting into my favorite restaurant territory. That's a great place, isn't it?
It is a great place.
Is there a best kept secret spot in Houston for you?
You know, it's going to sound funny, but I'm going to say Memorial Park. Now, you know.
I think last time you were here, you talked about the dog park. That was your favorite little place.
Oh, that little place I don't have a dog, but I overlook the dog park from my office window, so it's really great. You know, Memorial Park, and I'm biased because they're a client right now, but there are so many little unknown things in that park that I think people need to explore and really get to know that park. And so I think there's some really fun places in that park. And
when they make the Ann Murphy movie in Hollywood, who would you like to play you?
Oh, Meryl Streep.
Meryl Streep. Do you say that every time? I don't know if you said that last time.
I can't remember if I said that, but I just think she's
but she's an obvious choice,
yes,
right?
And she's
Best
my
actress,
age, so
anyway.
Very
good. Ann Murphy, thank you so much for all that you do.
Thank you.
And thanks for being with us here in the Nonprofit Leadership Studio.
Absolutely. Love it. Every year.
All right. Well, we will see you next time here in the Nonprofit Leadership Studio. Until then, keep up the good work.